long time no see, I guess. I got a whole bunch of books. I have 11 fiction, 1 nonfiction, so that's 12 books. A lot of big ones, a lot of big books that I've been meaning to get for a long time, so I'm really excited to dig into these and show you what I got. So for a little bit of background, I've read this book, House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. I've read this twice now. I read it once in October 2020, I think, and then once in 21, every year for Halloween for a couple of years. I forget exactly what years. But I liked it a lot, and I thought it was like really interesting. There's nothing, I hadn't read anything that was quite like this. If you know, you know. The book has all this like really wacky like formatting and structure and the different sort of, I guess, gimmicks or things that are unusual. It's easier if I just show you. I'm not gonna tell you what the book is about because this isn't part of the book haul. This is prelude to something else. So it has like all this wacky stuff. Can you see this? And then there's pages like this, and believe it or not, it reads pretty much like a normal novel. You have text that's sideways, upside down, backwards. I had to hold this book in a mirror to read parts of it, but by and large, it reads pretty normally. But the whole jumping around and having to navigate footnotes and endnotes and, notes in the margins, things like that, and then pages that are like almost entirely blank. All of that I thought was really interesting, and I read it twice. And so every time this book would come up in discussion, there would be also people talking about this other book, which I'm getting to, which is... It's S by novelist Doug Dorst and concept by filmmaker J.J. Abrams. I got this book as a Christmas gift in Christmas of 2022. So I don't want to call it a gimmick, or well, maybe I do, but this whole book's gimmick is that it's filled with all of these extra little tidbits, these postcards, handwritten notes in the margins, and like a whole bunch of other stuff. There's like 60 something pieces of extraneous non-book objects that are contained within all of this. So when you buy this, it comes all like shrink wrapped and everything, so you don't lose all the little extra tidbits. And it also comes in this little slipcase, which I think is really cool, and it's sealed with this S, which is also really neat. So I guess I can show you some of the little things that are inside here. Obviously it's sealed. I haven't seen any of the things for myself, besides other copies that I've seen before online and so forth. But just for you, audience, I'll open up the slipcase and see what's inside. Funny enough, I don't hear a lot of people like talking about this book. I don't hear a lot of people discussing it super often, unless it's like in the same corner of, again, House of Leaves and all that. I don't know if it's probably not like critically acclaimed. It's probably just very cool and like something you can't really replicate in any other form or formats or whatever. So I don't know. I think it'll be interesting at the very least. It sucks. It looked really nice on my shelf when it was just like that. But I know I should read it too. So now the seal comes off. You can actually remove the book parts. I just pray that nothing comes spilling out of this. This is like an unboxing within a video. That's cool. Yeah. So here's just like, look at all this stuff that's in the book. Ooh. You can see like there's little bits and pieces. Yeah. So the book itself. Oh god, I hope nothing falls out. Ship of Theseus by V.M. Straka. So as with House of Leaves, you're supposed to suspend your disbelief for a bit and accept this book that you're holding as a metafictional object, right? So the book that you're holding is not S by Doug Dorst and J.J. Abrams. It's a book called Ship of Theseus by a mysterious author named, again, V.M. Straka, or S, or whatever. 2 college students, a man and a woman, they're reading their university's copy of this. I think one's a senior, one's a grad student. And as far as I know, they don't know each other. And so they're reading this book and they're communicating with each other by writing in the margins of it. And so one will read it, they'll write in the margins, they'll return it. The other one will read it, they'll write in the margins, return it. And they have this sort of dialogue with each other and with the book, distinguished by different handwriting and different colored ink and all that. And also they communicate by leaving these little like trinkets and postcards in the book, like I mentioned before. I don't know much more beyond that, but just the concept I thought sounded really cool. Let's see if I can find some of the little goodies that are in here. Yeah, other interesting things. There's like a Dewey number here, 813.54, which is the Dewey number for fiction, right? It's not anything too crazy. Yeah, so right away you're sort of plunged into this, metafictional book object thing. It says book for loan, which I bought this at a bookstore. This isn't a book for loan. This is not a library book, right? But, suspend your disbelief. If found, please return to Workroom B19, Main Library, Pollard State University. It even has like fictionalized copyright with VM Straka instead of Doug Dorst here. So this is the first of the little objects. It's like, I don't even know what this is. I think it's in German. Yeah, confidential, 17th August 1928. Straka, just a whole mystery, right? It's not just the book, it's also the mystique surrounding it and all the little pieces that you have to piece together. Yeah, so throughout the book, let's see if I can show you. I'm trying not to like let the objects spill out here. But you can see there's like little writing in the margins here. There's different notes by different people. And so that's supposed to be like all these different people writing in the margins. I guess I thought it was just the two of them, but it very well could be more than that. Yeah, here's another piece. I cannot imagine this book can be spoiled, you know, plot-wise. It's probably one of those things that you just sort of experience. Oh, I just bumped my camera. Oops. There's this giant, like, faux coffee stains, multi-page, you know, bit of a, what's it called, like a memo pad. It's like a hand-drawn, oh my god. It's like this is a napkin that they drew like a map on and everything. So anyway, I think this stuff is really cool. At least conceptually. Maybe this will be so bad. Maybe I'll hate it. But anyway, if I guess you read this. It's a book. It's book shaped. If you've read this, let me know. Let me know what you think. Or let me know what you thought. Again, I don't hear a lot of people talking about this book, so I don't know if it's any good, but I think it's interesting at the very least. Let me put this safely back into its slipcase so nothing falls out. Ta-da! So luckily, you can still find copies of this book pretty easily. I've seen this at like Books A Million, at Barnes & Noble, things like that, and like on Amazon. So you can find copies of this pretty easily for now, but if this interests you at all, definitely get a new copy while it's still in print, because God help you if 10, 20, 30 years from now you want to read this and all you can find are used copies with half the stuff missing or sealed copies for hundreds of dollars. If you buy it today, again, the whole thing comes shrink wrapped, so like everything stays inside, and it goes for about $50 last time I checked. And that's S by Doug Dorst and J.J. Abrams, or Ship of Theseus by VM Straka. All right, so next up is Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar. Fellow YouTuber Leaf by Leaf called this the best book of 2022 that isn't War and Peace. I happened to see this on a shelf at Barnes & Noble shortly after watching his 2022 wrap-up video, and so I decided to pick up a copy. So the form of this novel is really interesting. It's designed to be read multiple times, and in a specific way. The first reading is relatively straightforward. You read chapters 1 through 56. However, the numbered chapters go far beyond 56. The second reading has you go through the chapters in a specific order, and then also includes like the last third of the book that you didn't read the first time. And so you read them in this very specific order. It's like 73, 1, 2, 116, 3, 84. The complete list is posted at the beginning here in the table of instructions. And so you can see the full sequence there. But you don't have to like refer to this table at the front. At the end of every chapter, it'll also just tell you like where you're supposed to go next if you're on your second read through. So like here at the end of chapter 11, you see this little bit at the bottom here where it says to 136. So I started this earlier in the year while I was waiting to start a group read. I was just trying to read things in the meantime, and I got like 100 pages through it before I had to, put it down and focus on other things. But no, I loved it. This is like super, super cool. The prose is really excellent. It has these giant, here we go, like giant blocks of text that takes some getting used to. It's like very stream of consciousness type thing. I haven't read, James Joyce at all, so I don't know if it's like true stream of conscious, but that's the word that comes to mind when I read this. Anyway, so the giant blocks of text take some getting used to, but once you sort of settle into the rhythm of it and you sort of get a feel for how the book is and settle into that headspace, it's like a really beautiful read. It's really excellent. I don't want to make, a shallow or inaccurate comparison, but the way that this novel talks about memory reminds me a lot of what little I've read of Proust in Search of Lost Time, or I guess what little bits of Proust I've heard in live readings of it on Instagram. So this is already like a sizable read, but knowing that I have to, or I guess knowing that I get to read this twice to get the full experience means that this will take quite a bit longer than I initially expected. But still, I'm looking forward to reading this one. That's Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar. Alright, so up next is Don DeLillo, Libra, which he published in 1988. This is a beautiful hardcover first edition. Maybe it's a British edition. I don't know. They didn't say that on the eBay page, but the price on the dust jacket is in pounds. So, great American novel? Great British novel? I don't know. Anyway, I'm really glad I gave Don DeLillo another chance. I've told this story many times, but I'll give you the abridged version. I read White Noise 5 years ago, hated it. I read Underworld last year, and I completely loved it. I've already talked about it to death. Literally like top 3 favorite books of all time. I reread White Noise, and I thought it was okay. So now, you know, I think Don DeLillo's an okay guy. I looked more into Underworld because I loved it so much, and I looked more into DeLillo's career around that time, and I wanted to hone in on what I thought was like good DeLillo, because I didn't like White Noise. I wanted to find out what about Underworld resonated with me so strongly. And so from what I gathered, the themes that he explores really deeply in Underworld, he started to explore in Libra, in Mao 2, and a couple other of the novels during that time period. Anyway, so Libra, fictionalized / novelized account of Lee Harvey Oswald's life leading up to the JFK assassination and the aftermath of the events on the nation's psyche. It's you can tell by the bookmark, I'm almost done reading this. This has taken me like forever, not because it's difficult, but because I'm like, it doesn't grip me the same way that Underworld has. And I don't think any book ever will. I can't imagine that a Don DeLillo book will be better than that one, but I really hope I'm wrong. But you know, I'm still liking this. I liked it enough to get this far. I'll finish it just to finish it. I'll probably just come back to it at a later time and reread it. Anyway, maybe I'm DeLillo'd out for now. So next up for fiction is Paul Auster, The New York Trilogy. So Paul Auster is a good friend of Don DeLillo's, so I figured I would give this book a try. It's another wacky postmodern book set in New York City. That's about all I know. I was hoping to get a nicer looking copy. The first editions of this book look, you know, really cool. I kept on seeing this like sun-bleached paperback copy in this used bookstore I go to, and it was like $5, so I figured I'd just grab it. From what little I know, this is sort of like a wacky gumshoe detective novel, but you know, I really don't know a whole bunch about this besides his relationship to Don DeLillo and place in the weird American canon, I guess. Anyway, let me know if you've read this one, if it's any good. Maybe I'll bump it up my list of things to read. So in one of my previous book hauls, I got W.G. Sebald's Rings of Saturn. Every time I tried reading this, I would like almost fall asleep, even if it was the middle of the day. It was insane. I've heard this book described as like blurring the lines between, you know, daydream and being awake, between fiction and biography, and that's absolutely true. The world in Rings of Saturn has the same sort of like dream logic and stream of consciousness that you have when you're like taking a nap in the middle of the day. You're still like aware of everything that's around you, but your thoughts are sort of just floating between reality and fantasy. Anyway, so the next book I got was Vertigo by W.G. Sebald. This is his first novel. Also, this edition also published by New Directions Press. So, if this is anything like what little I read of Rings of Saturn, I'm sure I'll love it. And from what I can tell, it's the same sort of thing where there's, you know, pictures and illustrations and doodles and stuff, and God knows what's going on here, but, you know, I don't want to keep on, like, saying the stream of conscious, but that's what this sounds like to me. I don't know. Yeah, okay, I just read the synopsis of Vertigo for, like, the first time. I usually don't like reading them. This is like exactly the same as Rings of Saturn, but maybe his first go at it. An unnamed narrator, beset by nervous ailments, journeys across Europe to Vienna, Venice, Verona, Riva, and finally to his childhood home in a small Bavarian village. He is also journeying into the past, traveling in the footsteps of Stendhal, Casanova, and Kafka. The narrator draws the reader line by line into a dizzying web of history, biography, legends, literature, and, most perilously, memories. Yeah, that's the most Sebald you can get. Anyway, so that's Vertigo by W.G. Sebald. So up next is William T. Vollmann, You Bright and Risen Angels, published in 1987. This is Vollmann's first novel, and a heck of a first novel. This thing's huge. So back in December of 2022, when I was still active in the sort of bookstagram community, one of my friends posted a picture of this book and said, "Hey, does anyone want to read this? Do a group read or something?" And so I responded, "Yeah, sure," because I was looking for an excuse to read him. And so I grabbed this Nice Penguin edition. This is like the only edition you can grab for like, that's not going to be like $50, $100. Anyway, so the buddy read of this book started back in March of this year. I didn't want to have like a daily page goal, like, read to page 20 this day, then page 40 the next day, because real life doesn't always work that way. Especially when you're trying to coordinate this with like even a small group of like 4 to 5 people. So we opted to do this much more flexible reading schedule in which we would check in with each other on the weekends and just, see how everyone's doing with the book. The weekly discussions were like really strong to start out with this, since everyone's motivation was so high and everyone was excited to read it and everything. But as the weeks went on, people started to fall behind, which is fine, life happens, whatever. It's also a huge book and like insanely dense if you read it, But bit by bit, the group started to dissolve. Eventually, it became just me and the guy that started the whole thing, making it like a buddy read instead of a group read. And then he left Instagram altogether, which I don't blame him, leaving me to just finish this book by myself. I did end up finishing this, by the way. All 600, 700 pages of this, 635. And I have lots more to say about it, but I'm saving my full thoughts for another time. I'll leave you with a very short review, though. Very good. I want to read more of William Vollmann. So now, finally, the one nonfiction book that I did get recently, which is Harold Bloom, The Western Canon, The Books and School of the Ages. One thing that I find really inspiring and motivating and just beyond all just interesting is to read someone's thoughts about the books that they love and to listen to someone talk about why they love them so much and to have them convince you to also read them. And one really strong example of that is the writing of Harold Bloom, as well as his lectures and interviews. Pretty much anything else that he's edited, annotated, or, gone through his hands in one way or the other. Bloom wrote this really great bit at the beginning of How to Read and Why, about why he believes so strongly in reading what he calls good books or great books, or in his words, the best that's ever been written. So this is reading a bit from the prologue called Why Read, from How to Read and Why by Harold Bloom. It matters if individuals are to retain any capacity to form their own judgments and opinions, that they continue to read for themselves. How they read, well or badly, and what they read cannot depend wholly upon themselves, but why they read must be for and in their own interest. You can read merely to pass the time, or you can read with an overt urgency, but eventually you will read against the clock. One of the uses of reading is to prepare ourselves for change, and the final change, alas, is universal. I know it's grim to think about it this way, but think of all the lists that you see, like 100 books to read before you die. And so that's sort of what he's getting at here, where eventually, like, you only have a limited amount of time on Earth. And so he just wanted to read the very best and didn't want to waste his time with, mediocrity. There's a small bit where he says, we owe mediocrity nothing in How to Read and Why. So if you don't already know Harold Bloom, or if you don't already know the Western Canon, this is the book that really got him in hot water. He was already sort of teetering on the edge of academic notoriety in the 90s. This was published in 94, and this really solidified him as cementing his place and like, this is what I think, and this is my book about it. So Western Canon is Bloom's best known work, maybe his most notorious. In the 90s, when this book was being written, he'd already developed this reputation for being an ardent defender of aestheticism, and he was tremendously outspoken about the state of literary study in colleges and universities. So at the heart of the Western Canon, Bloom explores the works of these 26 literary figures, authors, poets, playwrights, etc. And those 26 are William Shakespeare, Dante Alighieri, Geoffrey Chaucer, Miguel de Cervantes, Michel de Montaigne, Molière, John Milton, Samuel Johnson, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, William Wordsworth, Jane Austen, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Charles Dickens, George Eliot, Leo Tolstoy, Henrik Ibsen, Sigmund Freud, Marcel Proust, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, Franz Kafka, Jorge Luis Borges, Pablo Neruda, Fernando Pessoa, and Samuel Beckett. In the appendices, however, and this is, I think, a very valuable resource if you're just looking for a list of books to read, something to refer back to. In the appendices, he lists hundreds more authors and titles that he deems as also canonical or worth reading, and these are all grouped into eras. And this is like the very end of the book. It's cataloging the canon. And so he has these 4 appendices, which he lists all these authors and titles and poets and plays and other things that you can also read for yourself, of course. It begins with the Theocratic Age, from 2000 BCE to 1321 Common Era. So these are all like the ancient texts, like Gilgamesh, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Bible, the Apocrypha, Homer's The Iliad and Odyssey, of course, works from ancient India in Sanskrit, so the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. And there's a whole bunch of these. These are very like extensive lists for each one. There's the Quran in here, Beowulf, the Hellenistic Greeks, the Romans, everything. Anything that's like super old that he finds that he thinks is worth your time, whatever, he puts in here. Next is the aristocratic age from 1321 to 1832. Pretty wide-ranging points. And so here, this age contains everything from the Divine Comedy to Goethe's Faust? Yeah, Faust. It's gotta be Faust. Part 2. So everything in the appendices is organized by, the author's country of origin. Within the time period that they were written. And so you have Italian, Spanish, English, French, and German literature. You have, Chaucer, Canterbury Tales. Yeah, more Shakespeare, of course. It's all gonna be Shakespeare. Who else? Yeah, it also has stuff like suggests reading Da Vinci's notebooks. There's a lot in here that I have never heard of. Anyway, so the next one is the Democratic Age, which is from 1832 to 1900, which is like the beginning of the 20th century, which starts the next age after this. But the Democratic Age contains Victor Hugo, Émile Zola, Flaubert, William Wordsworth, William Blake, Emily Bronte, Edward Lear, a bunch of the Russians in this period. Yeah, George Eliot, Leo Tolstoy, Chekhov, Dostoevsky, Turgenev, Pushkin, and then finally some United States authors, because now the United States has been established at this point in time. So now you have the beginning of the American canon. Washington Irving, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, etc., etc. Again, just like a tremendous resource if you're looking for, another list of books to read. And finally, in the last appendix is the chaotic age, which is the 20th century, the 1900s onward. And he says pretty openly, I am not confident about this list as the first three. He's hesitant to call any of these books as long-lasting and canon-worthy, but it's a thing that's always shifting and not something that's really set in stone anyways. So following in the idea that Bloom encourages, the young reader, the lifelong reader, to read the very best that has been written, this could be a good resource for just sort of, guiding your reading a little bit. Because so much of what was written about in this book influenced tremendously the Western world. And I think that's, if you're interested in the history of literature, in the history of, I guess, very specifically Western literature and its influence on the world, I think that things like this can be valuable in helping you understand better the classics and their point in history and what they influenced and how they influenced them and so forth. Because most everything has their roots or has their debts in a way to a lot of the books that are mentioned in the Western canon. But anyway, I haven't read any of the Western canon. I've just sort of flipped through it and perused the lists a little bit for reading suggestions. If you've read this or if you've read any of the books that are, contained in this, let me know. Let me know what you think. Tangentially related to the Western canon, the next book is Herman Melville, Moby-Dick. Finally have a copy of this one. So in my most recent blog post, which you can read, I'll link it in the description, I said, if my lifelong goal is to have read as many great books and classics as possible, then what does progress look like on a day-to-day scale? By surrounding myself with books that support my reading goals, the goals become more achievable. In other words, it's a lot easier for me to read Don Quixote or Moby-Dick if I can just take them off of my shelf. Moby-Dick seems to sort of haunt discussions of classics, of great books, big books, books to read before you die, all of that. It always seems to come up. But how many people do you know that have actually read it? Maybe a lot of people, maybe nobody, I don't know. Anyway, somehow these classics are a thing that everybody has read and also nobody has read. They sort of talk about that, but they haven't actually read it. Oh, they mean to get to it, but they haven't read it yet. For something that has so much, cultural gravity that comes up so often, I'm surprised that I haven't read it yet. So I decided to pick up a copy for myself. This is the third Norton critical edition. It's the complete text, but I was hoping that it would be a big book, like a physically large book, because that's, I don't know, it's fun to have a giant text to pour through. But no, it's the whole thing. It's printed on almost like Bible paper, super, super thin, very, very small text. But it's all there. It's the whole book. The main text is the beginning to here, and then everything after this is essays and secondary resources. And wow, cool illustrations. That's nice. Look, whales, boats. Isn't that cool? Anyway. So there are a lot of things that interest me about this book beyond it just being a classic and something that I should probably read before I die. I've heard a lot of people say that this book is very discursive, it's rambling, digressive, and that there are these like encyclopedic entries about whales and whaling history and how to make lamps from whale fat just in the middle of, what seems like a regular narrative. And some people just hate that. They get very annoyed by that, but to me that sounds like right up my alley. It's right in line with things that I really enjoy, like the postmodern books that are just, have an unreliable narrator or just jump from place to place, have giant blocks of text that sort of interrupt the main narrative to talk about something else in very specific detail. Maybe they have their roots in this. Maybe that's where a lot of people got their ideas. And of course, this has its, roots in something else before it, and so forth and so forth. Critics of this book, or at least critics of these non-story bits, are quick to cite the fact that Melville was, so I've heard, paid by the word. So the more that he wrote, the more he was paid. This angle is used to say that the digressive bits are unnecessary, that they're fluff, they're filler, he only put them in to inflate the page count and make more money. Well, okay, make more money, whatever. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. All the people that I've heard that have talked about this book have said like, yeah, it's great, and they don't mention the bits that are stupid or that are, supposedly unnecessary. All of the people that, herald this as a great classic and one of the best books of all time don't say, yeah, a great story about the whale, but, except those parts about the whaling bits and the making the oil lamps from whale fat and the whaling history. You can cut all that out, but otherwise, great book and the classic, except those bits. Like, it's all part of it. And so I'm really interested in reading more about that. So as I've said in my previous book hauls, and as you can tell by, the books I've been buying, I've been getting more and more into literary criticism. And so I decided to get this Norton Critical edition with annotations, essays, discussions, just all in one, instead of having to read the main text and having to track down secondary resources afterwards. It's nice just to have everything about this book in one place, so I can it's all right here, ready whenever I am. It's funny, I'm reading Italo Calvino's essay collection called Why Read the Classics, and in the title essay he talks about the importance of reading a classic book, and completely avoiding all secondary material and letting the text just speak for itself, and only later, if you want to supplement your reading, you can read the bits about it. But he argues really strongly, but with very, simple, persuasive language, that classics are books that, will always have this sort of orbit of discourse around them, but will ultimately shake all of the discourse off and just exist by itself. And Calvino is a big opponent of the idea that the secondary resources can say anything more than the text can say by itself. All to say, read the book first, and then you can read things about the book, and that the text will speak for itself, and you don't need to read all these other things about it unless you really want to, and only afterwards. Anyway, so that's Herman Melville, Moby-Dick. Have you read Moby-Dick? I haven't, not yet. So during my birthday weekend, New York Review Books had this giant site-wide sale. It was 20% off 2 books, 30% off 3 books, and 40% off 4 or more books. I pretty much always keep a cart handy in case a giant sale like this ever comes up, and so as a little treat to myself, I bought a small stack. So first up, I got Ernst Jünger, I think that's right, The Glass Bees, with an introduction by Bruce Sterling. I've already started this one a little bit, and I think it's really, really great so far. I got this one on a recommendation from a friend. I'm like 50 pages in so far. It's super good. I guess I didn't realize this is like a science fiction novel. I didn't know a whole bunch about it going into it, but it's really nice reading like cozy science fiction again after only reading like really intense, difficult, hard, literature for so long. Ernst Jünger was a German author who lived to be 102. He was born in 1895 and lived until 1998. Heck of a long time. I cannot even begin to imagine witnessing the world change throughout the 20th century, but Jünger did, and boy did he write about it. He's best known for his memoir, The Storm of Steel, or I think just Storm of Steel, which details his experiences fighting for Germany in World War I. The Glass Bees is about the progression of technology for power and control, all under the guise of, for progress and for the people and so forth. The protagonist is this ex-cavalryman who doesn't have a job. So he's approached by one of his old comrades, one of his ex-cavalrymen twinnings, who offers him employment with a man named Zapparoni, head of Zapparoni Works, described in the book's introduction as, quote, a hybrid of Bill Gates and Walt Disney. You can insert whatever corporate tycoon mega billionaire you want there. It all works. Zapparoni's company makes robots and little anyway, little robots, all in like the shape of like small animals, including the glass bees. And they perform little tasks and make people's jobs and lives easier and safer. They deal with hazardous waste and so forth. And so this is, like a thinly veiled allegory for the progression of technology and how that affects people's lives and work and industry and so forth. And the company also makes these very highly produced feature films, the comparison to Walt Disney. And these completely capture people's attention. People are just completely obsessed with these films, and they completely dominate the film industry. So the book originally came out in 1957, but this edition by NYRB with the introduction was published in 2000, and he goes on to say, Bruce Sterling, that this is so prophetic. He predicted so much of what technology would become in the 20th and 21st century, because of course it's the turn of the millennium. And reading this in 2023, it's like, oh my god, it's like any prediction about technology is either like right on the money, and you can sort of like draw parallels to like what you want it to be, or you can sort of see what the predictions end up being, like video chat, or little robots or artificial intelligence or whatever. This is in like every science fiction book, predicting how technology will evolve in the future and predicting how it'll impact society at large, etc., etc. And reading this in 2023, it's very surreal. It's only become more and more true. At the time, this was dismissed as being like, technophobic and like anti-technology, which, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm only a little bit ways through. It's a nice read so far. Anyway, so that's The Glass Bees by Ernst Jünger. So I know I've been saying, I don't know a lot about this book, but that only continues to be more true. The next one I got is Sigizmund Krzhizhanovsky, Memories of the Future. So this was written in 1929 and I guess published much later at the end of the 90s. In 1989. I'd never heard about this author, Krzhizhanovsky, before. During his life, I guess he prided himself on being obscure or being lesser known. After his death, his legacy sort of continued to be more underground. I don't really hear a lot of people talking about him. All I really do know about the author is that he was born in Kiev in 1887, back when it was part of the Soviet Union and not part of Ukraine. What little I know about the book itself, I just know from the synopsis. So reading from the back of the book here for a second. Written in Soviet Moscow in the 1920s, but considered too subversive even to show to a publisher, the 7 tales included here attest to Sigizmund Krzhizhanovsky's boundless imagination, black humor, and breathtaking irony. A man loses his way in the vast black waste of his own small room. The Eiffel Tower runs amok. A kind soul dreams of selling, quote, everything you need for suicide. An absent-minded passenger boards the wrong train, winding up in a place where night is day, nightmares are the reality, and the backs of all facts have been broken. A man out looking for work comes across a line for logic, but doesn't join it, as there's no guarantee the logic will last. A sociable corpse misses his own funeral. An inventor gets a glimpse of the far from radiant communist future. Anyway, so it's a short story collection. From what I can tell, just absurd and very silly, and I'm not going to say postmodern. Everything silly is postmodern. But, just what's the word? Subversive, whatever. So that's Sigizmund Krzhizhanovsky, Memories of the Future. So the next book I got from NYRB was John Williams' Butcher's Crossing. The only other John Williams book that I've read before is Stoner, also published by NYRB. Super, super good. Please read this book. Holy smokes, best book. Anyways, so super good book by John Williams. And so I figured I'd pick up this other one by him. So he's only written a handful of things. He's written Stoner, Butcher's Crossing, Augustus, and maybe some other ones. Those are the big ones. Those are the ones that people talk about. Anyway, the only thing I really know about this one is that it's by John Williams, who I like already, and that this is among the best Western novels ever written, right up there with Warlock by Oakley Hall, which I got a couple of book hauls ago. Anyway, so I'm eager to read more John Williams, and I'm eager to see what the best of the West has to offer. So finally, the last book that I got during my big book haul is a big book. It's William Gaddis, The Recognitions. Holy smokes. It's a big book. I hate to say, I don't know a lot about this book, but I really don't. I don't know a lot about the plot. This has been on my to-read list since like 2017, ever since I became aware of what, postmodernism is or whatever. This book came up in discussion of every great American novel, post-war, postmodern, big book fiction. It's always Thomas Pynchon, Gravity's Rainbow, William H. Gass, The Tunnel, David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest, Don DeLillo, Underworld, and William Gaddis, The Recognitions. It was always those books that came up in conversation. And so finally, I have a copy on my shelf. Again, I really don't know a whole lot about the plots, but that's okay. All the books that I mentioned before were ones that I found because of their sort of literary orbit, their relationship to each other. So people are like, oh, if you like this giant book, you'll probably like this other giant book and this other giant book, and so forth. Each one of those post-war, postmodern big books I've read have been incredible, like my favorite books of all time. And so I feel confident, diving headfirst into this, not knowing too much about it. Anyway, have you read this? Is it good? Did you not like it? Did you like it? It's William Gaddis, The Recognitions. So that's everything. Those are all the books that I've gotten from like Christmas until literally a couple weeks ago when I bought all those NYRB books. It's me from the future. I actually have one more book. I lied. Stop the presses. Hold your horses. I actually have one more book. It literally came in the mail just yesterday. I ordered it a couple days ago and I thought it'd be here like way later because the eBay seller was supposedly on vacation, but it actually arrived super quick, so I can now squeeze it into this video. When I say this is a big book haul, I mean it's a book haul of big books. It's big because there's a lot of books. There's a lot of big books. A lot of books I've been meaning to get for a long time. This one is a long time coming. It's... Thomas Pynchon, Mason and Dixon. Beautiful, beautiful hardcover, first edition, first printing. I didn't realize this about the first editions of this book, that there's actually, you can sort of tell, but if you didn't know, you'd never guess. There's two dust jackets here. So there's like this text below it, and then the Thomas Pynchon, Mason and Dixon. That part is part of the like second. I can sort of see like this. Yeah, it's like a plastic. Isn't that cool? When I see people's shelves and I see that they have a copy of Mason and Dixon, I always noticed they were glossy, and I figured everyone was just, taking good care of their nice Pynchons, right? And we're like getting a dust jacket cover for them. But I guess that's just how they are, which is really cool. So anyway, it's Pynchon. I haven't read him for 5 years since I read Gravity's Rainbow and his short story collection Slow Learner. It's been a long time since I read him, so I'm looking forward to reading him again with Mason and Dixon. I don't know a ton about the plot, except that it's about explorers Mason and Dixon, but it's Pynchon. It's gonna be difficult. It's gonna be cool. It's an enormous book, so I'm sure I'll love it. No doubts about that. Anyway, okay, back to the rest of the video. If you've read any of them, if you liked them, if you hated them, if they're on your shelf, if they're on your to-read list, let me know what you think. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on these sort of things, especially the weirder, more obscure books from NYRB. I think those are always a real literary gem, hidden gem. If you're interested in following more of what I do online, I have a website. It's benheels.com. You can't miss it. It has all my blog posts. It has all my music posts and things about books, music, video games, all that good stuff. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.